So everybody, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jonathan DeLong. He's an assistant professor of surgery at University of Tennessee, um, with a HPV, obviously, surgical group. And I think you'll get a sense of it in his talk. But he's a founding director of the Institute of Surgical Innovation. And after his fellowship, he joined this institution after his fellowship in HPV and robotic surgery at Stanford. Um, and really, his focus has been to develop cross-disciplinary collaborations between engineers, computer scientists, and industry with HPV surgeons and other surgeons, I would assume. So he's integrating things like AI-driven surgical navigation, uh, digital twins, and things of that sort into HPV surgery. And some of he talked about some of these concepts yesterday. They're quite interesting, and I hope we kind of touch base on that. But so I'll let Jonathan begin, and we'll take questions at the end.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Matraca. So yeah, my name is Jonathan DeLong. I am a liver and pancreas surgeon at the University of Tennessee. I wear a few hats there, but I'm at the Health Science Center College of Medicine in Knoxville. I'm also a joint professor at the University of Tennessee Department of Biomedical Engineering, and as you said, I'm the founding director of the Institute for Surgical Innovation. And so today, what I'd like to talk to you about is sort of a new take on something that we've all been doing for many years at big research institutions and all over, really, as surgeons who are interested in moving our field forward and how we can do that and how we can get beyond the incredible discoveries and insights that we gain every day, both in our research and while working with patients in the clinic, and how we can turn that into a larger scale impact. And so I've had the opportunity to dive into that a little bit in my job at the University of Tennessee. So I'd like to share what we're doing and tell you a bit about that. So I do have some disclosures. I'm on a couple of certain advisory councils. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by giving a little background. I'm going to say why now? Why is this important? Why is this something that we need to be focusing on as clinicians? What is the purpose of taking an active role in directing where our field is going? Talk about the vision of what we're building in Knoxville, Tennessee, and then talk about what we're going to be doing next. So, this is an aerial view of Knoxville, Tennessee. We are in eastern Tennessee. So, for folks that, like myself, just a couple years ago, weren't super familiar with the geography of Tennessee, it's in the eastern portion of the state. So, we're about 2 hours from Charlotte, which I understand there are some high-profile McGill graduates there. And we're just south of Kentucky. We are 2 hours east of Nashville and about 3 hours north of Atlanta. So right in the gateway of the Smoky Mountains, they say. So you can see some of the Smoky Mountains in the background here. And we're known, I would say, for a couple things. Um, Dolly Parton is from Knoxville, Tennessee. And so she's obviously a global celebrity. And we're also known for football. Those are the two things that I think when people, if you've heard of Knoxville, Tennessee, those might be the two things that come to mind. But what I realize is that we're actually so much more than a celebrity and a game. We actually have, UT Medical Center. We have the Tickle College of Engineering. We have a School of Veterinary Medicine that's quite large and has a lot of capabilities and animal studies, et cetera, and facilities. We just broke ground on a medical school. So again, Tennessee is a bit of a unusual state in that the main university is in one part of the state, but the medical school, up until very recently, was completely on the other side of the state, which is about a 7 hour drive or 9 hour drive, something like that. So we just broke ground on a new medical school. We have we have a law school. We have Spark Incubator program. So this is a program that we give space and start drive entrepreneur resources. We have the Haslam College of Business. We have the UT Research Foundation, which sort of sits atop all of these different organizations and helps with IP and tech transfer. And then we have the Oak Ridge National Labs. So, you've heard about Lutathera for neuroendocrine tumor. For those who are at the symposium yesterday, we had really great talks about neuroendocrine tumor and how radiopharmaceuticals are really have the capacity to transform what we do in cancer care. And Oak Ridge National Lab makes or really creates many of those radioisotopes that are used in radiopharmaceuticals. So when I got to UT just a couple of years ago, I saw, wow, or I thought to myself, wow, there are so many resources here, and we're so close in such a proximity. But the issue, and this I think is pretty consistent in many places, is that those resources were pretty much spread out in isolation, and they weren't really working together despite our geographic proximity. And so we came together and had this concept of what if we could bring all of these resources and sort of mix them and have more interaction with the clinicians and the research scientists at Oak Ridge and the engineers at the University of Tennessee, and how could we promote that sort of cross-disciplinary interaction at an early stage? So how do we get people to talk about, what they're seeing, what are the problems that we see in the hospital or the unmet clinical needs, if we're going to use the terminology of the biodesign process, and what are our capabilities? What are people already doing in their research labs that are making it to, manuscripts and presentations, but not translating into the clinical space? And so I actually gave a grand rounds when I started, and after that grand rounds, I had a conversation with our division chief of minimally invasive surgery. And as it turns out, he had been working with a research scientist and engineer for about 10 years on a really novel concept that involved magnetically controlled camera that could be placed inside the abdomen and controlled with a robotic arm, which to me seemed totally revolutionary. I mean, imagine not having to use a trocar for a laparoscope. You could just drop it in one of your ports, then control it magnetically through the abdominal wall with a robotic arm. And they've been working on this for 10 years already. And in fact, we actually were just awarded a new NSF grant to continue the development of this product and invention. But they've been working together for many years, and we thought, how could we promote this? How could we do more of this? And so we created something, and they created it, and we kind of continued it, which was this. We called it the RTD2, which sounds kind of like R2D2, so that was our project name. And we had three core objectives. So the first is we wanted to develop basic science research projects that solved real world problems. Okay, so we wanted to figure out what are the things that we are having, the problems that we're seeing in the operating room, and how could we obtain some institutional funding to use as seed grants. Then we wanted to create more longitudinal collaborative projects, and we wanted to bring together clinicians, students, MS, PhDs, and build educational programs so that we could learn how can we work together, not in the later stages of a project, but how do we work together from the beginning so that we're making sure that the engineering projects have a clinical basis and that our clinical problems have an engineering solution. And finally, we really wanted to develop this pipeline or a machine of experts, ideas, and processes to accelerate these projects towards the goal of commercialization and publication. So, we've started by putting together some MedTech symposiums. And basically, these were almost like a speed dating or these quick shot symposiums where we would bring together clinicians that were working on some projects, and we would bring together some engineers that were working on different things and just have 5-10 minute presentations. And we did a couple of these in April of 2024, and then another one in November of the same year. And from that, we decided, why don't we scale this a little bit? Why don't we put together a surgical innovation symposium and bring speakers from out of town that talk about what they're doing in their institutions? So in April 2025, we put together our first surgical innovation symposium, and we brought speakers from Stanford to talk about the biodesign program and Vanderbilt to talk about their VISE program, which is Vanderbilt Institute for Surgical Engineering. From that, organically, just by bringing together clinicians and engineers and a half a day on a Saturday, we found out that there was someone in the vet school who was creating 3D printed mesh, and they, of course, uh, started a team with our minimally invasive surgeons to talk about what could we be doing, how can we use new 3D carbine products to create a mesh that is not a sheet, but something that is able to conform to a 3D space that could be reproducible, potentially printed on demand, and immediately IP invention disclosure was filed, grants were submitted, and they are now well on their way to starting a pretty innovative and cool project. We also came up with a surgical risk stratification tool. So here we have Fei Liu. He's one of our machine learning and computational scientists. And just by having a little breakout session where people started to ideate, they come up with this incredible risk stratification tool that they are also now submitting grants for to get funded. And then we have our mobile mammography program. So for those who don't know, Appalachia, which is right where we are in Tennessee, is a very underserved area. We have some of the worst outcomes in cancer, not just in the United States, but actually the world, due to poverty, low resources, the mess that is the healthcare system in the United States, and a number of other issues that we are up against. And so we actually have units that will drive out into the community to provide services. We have 2 mammography units, and now we have a lung cancer screening unit with a low dose CT scanner to help screen for lung cancer. But we wanted to figure out, could we have an algorithm that could risk stratify mammograms right at the time of patients getting their mammogram? Because one of the issues for these patients, yeah, we can get to them, but can we contact them afterwards? Do they have a working phone? Do they have internet? Do they have access to those results? And so we thought, what if we could develop a risk stratification tool that we could give them an immediate assessment, not a diagnostic, not this isn't an FDA device, but it would be a way to say like, hey, you are high risk, you need to follow up so that they're more driven to seek those follow-up results. And so those three and actually several other projects really spun out of that a half day on a Saturday afternoon, and we thought, you know what, I think we're onto something here. And so, as mentioned, some grants were submitted through NIH and NSF, which hopefully we hear back from at some point. And we came together and produced or launched the Institute for Surgical Innovation. So here are the founders. This is myself, obviously. This is Greg Mancini. As mentioned, he is the division chief for minimally invasive surgery, as well as the vice president of perioperative medicine. And then we have Jindong Tan, and he is a professor of biomedical engineering. And together, we have co-founded the Institute for Surgical Innovation, which sits kind of on the UT Medical Center, the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and the Oak Ridge National Lab. So here are some leaders that made this possible. Brad Day is our Associate Vice Chancellor for Research. I would say that he probably is the secret sauce in something like this because when you are putting something like this together, getting alignment and buy-in from key stakeholders is absolutely integral and necessary. So he kind of went around to everyone who could possibly want to be involved because when something like this happens organically and people start hearing about it, they want to know, okay, why didn't she come to us? Why aren't we involved? And so he is very intentional about reaching out to the business school, who's now very interested because they were invited, and reaching out to the law school, who might be interested in IP and patent assistance, and reaching out to our Sparks Innovation Center that's also doing innovation, and really kind of going out and being very intentional about, before it gets to the point where people are hearing about it and wondering why they're not involved, you want to invite everyone to the party so that everyone feels like they're involved and you get that buy-in early. We have Dean Kraft, who is uh, really has been instrumental in bringing the medical school from Memphis, again on the complete other side of the state, to Knoxville, which I think is going to be extremely helpful for the launch of this, as innovation is something that excites folks at all levels and can be used as a way to draw innovation-focused medical students to our program. We have Lisa Duncan, who is our Chief Quality Officer at UT Medical Center. So, you would think that everyone would be interested, and everyone is interested, but you have to understand that the medical center has their mission, the university has their mission, the medical school has their mission, and they're often aligned, but it's not quite a circle. It's more of a Venn diagram. And so getting that alignment, explaining what the value proposition is, and making sure that we're all rowing in the same direction is completely necessary. And then Matthew Mensch, who's the dean of the College of Engineering, he has been instrumental for us in helping. And I'll talk a little bit later about that alignment and what that looks like for us and how we were intentional about creating it. So why now? Why is this something that we felt compelled to do at this moment? So if you were at the talk yesterday, and I won't take a deep dive into this because I took a really deep dive yesterday, but AI is rapidly changing medicine. That is, you're hearing it every single day. You're getting push notifications about things that are just insane, like $56 billion revenue in a single quarter for one company, which is out of it's something that I can barely conceive. But who's driving this change? I think we saw with the electronic health record that clinicians were not driving the EHR. That wasn't something that we were involved in. We were busy in our clinical day to day. And as a result, the output of the EHR was not focused on the patient or the physician. It was focused on administrative outputs because those were the people who were driving that change. So what happens with AI is going to look very different if it's administrators who are driving the targets or if it's clinicians who are driving the targets. And what that means is as these models and as these capabilities continue to develop, and engineers who don't really understand medicine are designing what our capabilities could be, there's one route where we could continue to figure out how to make doctors more efficient and drive us to do more cases and to produce more output. And that certainly will be a great use for AI. But there are also targets that need to be developed in how to make us better physicians, how to give us a better quality of life, how to bring us back to the bedside instead of being pushed further away, like it happened with EHR. And so I would challenge everyone who's here today to become involved, to reach out to computer scientists and engineers who are working on AI and say, hey, is there something would this be something that we could develop? Or here, this is a problem that I'm having. Is there a way that AI could help to address these clinical needs? Because it's really going to be us. It's not someone else out there somewhere. It's all of us who can get involved in this and see how AI can transform the lives of our patients. So here's a slide that has, some examples of different projects that we've been working on. Again, sort of in isolation. So we had some really clever robots, flexible robots. We had small robotics. We had some giant database of electronic medical information library, which we call Emily, and just a number of really incredible projects. But again, all sort of in silos. And if you look at the license disclosures that were through the entire institution, the amount that were coming from medicine and from the medical space were actually pretty small and kind of a really, for all of the work that we're doing and all of the incredible presentations and the research and the grants. The amount of tech transfer, the amount of things that could potentially become a patent or a licensed technology or even a startup was really a pretty small percentage. And so we wanted to see how could we scale that? How could we make that bigger? So here's a couple photos from our first symposium. We had some panel discussions. We had breakout sessions, as I mentioned. We brought in local venture capitalists. We brought in all sorts of stakeholders to talk about what are the things that we don't learn as clinicians. No one's taught this in medical school. So how can we understand what's the gap? What's preventing us from going from an idea to a company? And so, as I mentioned, surgery is changing fast. We really need new ways to solve problems. So, all these advances in not just AI, but surgical robotics, imaging, devices, they're all sort of outpacing clinical adoption. And that's been the case for a long time in medicine for good reason, because we use what works, we know what works, and it's going to take a lot for us to take a risk on something that hasn't been validated with years of research or years of experience in our own hands. And so there are a lot of barriers between engineering innovation and clinical adoption. There's also, you don't want to be seen as someone with conflicts of interest. You don't want to be seen as someone who is taking risks or experimenting on your patients. So we have an obligation to our patients to really sort of toe the line and not be reckless in our adoption of new technologies. So there is a healthy sense of a little bit of a wall and a threshold before we will adopt something that has the capacity to potentially impact our patients. However, we also have an obligation to move our field forward. So surgeons have a limited opportunity. We're limited in time. We have 1,000 things to do. We have a stack of papers on our desk to sign, dictations to dictate, and this is time. It's cost prohibitive. The cost being the time, because we really have our obligation to our patients first. So really finding the right partner is what is essential, and that's why this working with an engineer whose job is full-time research with some teaching is going to help us to address what we lack in terms of time and knowledge in that space. And then there's a lack of training infrastructure for modern technology enhanced surgery. So we found, or we believe, that this gap and this sort of knowledge of how this even happens, how does something go from the bench to the bedside, could potentially be filled. So we saw two different models for innovation. One of them was the Stanford Biodesign Program, and the another was the Vanderbilt Institution for Surgery and Engineering. And what we saw is that these programs had really two different flavors to them. The Stanford Biodesign Program, and Dan Ezuguri, who's the director, came and gave a keynote speaker. It's really centered around education. Their output is people who are trained in their process of innovation. They are not tracking the number of startups that come out of their program, even though many do. Their goal is to teach people the process of identifying unmet clinical needs, designing a solution for that need, and then implementing that solution. And they do it very well. And he came in and talked about that. So they want to develop leaders in biomedical technology innovation through collaborative education programs and resources. So create a network, figure out the process of getting funding, seed funding. What does that even mean? And creating business plans, figuring out well, who the market is, who's going to pay for this solution. And they do that very well. Students often do launch startups, but that is not the mission of the program. In contrast, Bob Webster, who's a PhD, and if you've seen any of the flexible or there's some urological robots that have hit the market recently. Many of those came out of Vanderbilt, and then there's EndoQuest. I believe their instruments have come through innovations that were developed at Vanderbilt. He came in and talked about a sort of a different model. So their program is more focused on research. So they bring engineers and clinicians together, they apply for grants together, they come up with new innovations, new IP, and then that IP gets funneled into startups. Their mission is to advance surgical and interventional care through the development, implementation, and evaluation of innovative methods, devices, and systems. One of the things that he touched on during his talk is that they really struggled because initially their headquarters or where they were based was about a mile and a half away from the hospital. And so just that short distance prevented clinicians from interacting with engineers because if you can't just walk over between cases, you really have to make a day of it. There's parking, there are all these things that seem like they're small barriers, but become big barriers when you only have about 25 minutes to do something, and then you have to get back to the operating room or the clinic. And so that actually changed dramatically when they relocated their center in the hospital in Vanderbilt. And as mentioned, grants fund research, and then those get spun off into businesses. So we saw these two programs. We're like, okay, well, what would work for us? What do we want to do at the University of Tennessee? And so we said, why not both? So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to have a research pipeline, or that we're already developing with grant funding that starts with clinicians and engineers that submit grants together, and an education program that is going to train undergraduate, master's students, and medical students in courses that are cross-listed with the goal of ultimately creating a biodesign type fellowship. All right, so what is the vision? So we intend to create a nationally recognized hub where surgeons and engineers can co-develop the future of surgical care through research, education, and real-world impact. And we're calling this the Institute for Surgical Innovation. So our purpose is to create a collaborative platform and environment where surgeons and engineers can co-develop the future of surgery. We've outlined three pillars. So we will do this through research, education, and commercialization. And those three pillars sort of drive each other. So the education is going to drive the research, which is going to drive the commercialization. So here are the some faculty, both at the UT Medical Center, Oak Ridge National Lab, as well as the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And all of these people will be working together in the Institute for Surgical Innovation. So really, when designing a program like this, you have to do it with intentionality. So we talked to a lot of people about similar programs that they've heard of or similar processes that they've seen that maybe were successful or others that were not successful. And it turns out that you really have to understand how are people measured? How are, a clinician who's at the medical center they have different metrics that are being tracked than people that are at the College of Engineering. And so what we needed to do is build an intentionally aligned and incentive structure so that people weren't choosing, well, if I'm going to be involved in the Institute for Surgical Innovation, then I'm not going to get credit for this grant for tenure and promotion, for instance. And so we started by thinking, okay, How can we make sure that this is going to work? So we went to all the key stakeholders and have arranged a system for sharing of indirect costs. So if we submit grants together, the indirect costs will be shared through the institute so that the organizations that, so the medical center and the College of Engineering, for instance, would get some of those indirect costs, but some of them would go through the Institute for Surgical Innovation. We also, and this is extremely important, have created a clear IP tech transfer policy from the start. So if you have a startup and you have not discussed how the IP was going to be shared in terms of credit, whether that's through the institution, the inventors, individuals that are involved in the project, that can get very messy because when something's a cool idea and a grant, nobody's thinking about that. But if it turns into a $100 million company, everyone is thinking about that. Fortunately, we have the UT Research Foundation, which wears a lot of hats. They're separate from these institutions, but they sort of have a foot in all of our institutions. And so we will have the UT Research Foundation delegate credit to the different stakeholders that are involved, and that's something that will be binding from the start. And as things develop, reevaluation cycles will be performed at predetermined intervals. Joint faculty appointments. So we have already had joint faculty appointments in the Department of Surgery as well as the Department of Biomedical Engineering that will help people to get credit for the participation that they have on either side. And then credit for tenure and promotion. We wanted to make sure that if somebody applied for a grant within the department or the Institute for Surgical Innovation, that that would count towards their tenure and promotion when they were going up for then their next level at the medical center or at the College of Engineering. So what are we going to do next? What are our next steps? First, we have our next version of the Surgical Innovation Symposium. So we will be having our second Innovation Symposium on April 25th, 2026. Next, we have a steering committee. So we put together a steering committee and we're writing out our strategic plan. Because of the breadth of what we're trying to do, we can't do everything all at once. We're not going to start with a full biodesign fellowship and a commercialization pipeline and all these things. So we have to start with bite-sized pieces and then scale them on top of that as we have our successes. Then we've created a shared space and a new center for precision health, which I'll show you in just a moment, and then adjunct faculty appointments. So our next Surgical Innovation Symposium is going to build on our prior. So our first one was focused on showcasing what programs are out there. This year, we're going to invite our keynote speaker. We'll be talking about a program that she built at her institution. So Debbie Keller will be coming from Mayo Clinic, Arizona, and she'll talk about the biodesign program that she built in collaboration with Arizona State University. And it's sort of it fits for where we're at in our program build. And we'll have panels, we'll have venture capitalists again. So we'll think about what worked, what didn't work, and scale that. And then there's also International Surgical Robotics Conference that will be in Knoxville at the same time. So we're going to have our conference a day after that so that we can have some of those speakers who are coming from around the world to speak at our conference as well. Now, we've also formed a steering committee. We have an MOU signed between our hospital and the university so that we can, some of these things about IP and indirect cost sharing are not going to be the focus of the steering committee. The steering committee can focus on what the actual goals of the organization are and not get bogged down by the details that will have already been predetermined and worked out because those are the things that get very sticky. So we felt that if we ironed those out initially, then we could focus on things like what are we trying to accomplish? What is our vision? What is our mission? And what are we trying to get as outputs, which I'll talk about in a moment. We'll have representation from all stakeholders, and our goal is to grow this community of innovators. So we've just not broken ground. We've just opened our Center for Precision Health, which is a joint space for clinicians and engineers to work on projects. I had an opportunity to tour your research building yesterday. So this is like one slice of one floor of that, but we do have some space for workbenches, 3D printers, for biocompatible products. We have some clinic space for research. We've got some conference rooms. And then we have some bench space for startups through the Spark Innovation Center. The idea behind the Center for Precision Health is to encourage collisions or informal discussions so that people can talk about what they're working on and what they need and encourage more of these partnerships. Here's some renderings of what it looks like. And then here's the view of the Tennessee River. There's lots of parking, which is critical to get people to come there. And here's a photo of the groundbreaking, which was about a month ago now. Or not groundbreaking, the grand opening rather. So finally, adjunct appointments. So we have criteria, so it's not something we just give out to everyone. So there has to be participation, there has to be joint grant submissions. There are a number of other criteria that allow for adjunct appointments, and there's reciprocity. So surgeons get appointments in Department of Biomedical Engineering, and likewise, biomedical engineers can have access to joint appointments in the Department of Surgery. And then joint teaching courses. So as I mentioned, we're opening a new medical school. So the courses that are taught in biodesign will be cross-listed with master's and PhD courses or master's courses that are taught at the university. So how are we going to measure success? What are the outputs that we're looking for? So first, we're going to count the number of collaborative research grants that are submitted. Second, we're looking to count the number of new research partnerships that are formed. So how many teams are spun off from what we're doing. And then finally, the third initial measure of success will be the number of researchers that are supported by grants that are awarded through the Institute of Surgical Innovation. Now, as we have more successes, our measurements of success will evolve, but we wanted to initially start with something that could be counted and deliverable. So we are not just imagining the future of surgery, we're building it, and we're being very intentional about getting it out there so that we can share it with the world. So here's just a small list of many of the people who have been involved in making this possible. And here's a save the date for our Surgical Innovation Symposium. You can feel free to snap a photo of the QR code if you would like to learn more about it. I'd be happy to take any questions.
That's great, Jonathan. It sounds like you've been busy.
Yeah, a little bit.
So you're not just operating.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's questions. Are people texting them in, or are going to people actually? Uh, where is?
I can ask a question, and then I think Professor Hushiar has a question.
Sure.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for that great talk and your vision. I think it's great to see. I think you're trying to build something very, very ambitious, and it's really fantastic. I think one of the things that a lot of the pieces, in creating sort of this innovation pipeline, one of the ones that you mentioned, and we also copied the Stanford biodesign model when Jerry Fried was our chair, and he was very inspired by that model and created, brought some of the pieces together. So here we call it the CLIP, the Clinical Innovation Platform, which is our clinical incubator embedded in the hospital. And we have Professor Hushiar, who's running what we call SUPER, which is the robotics and AI lab. And he's an engineer. I think he has a question. And then the other piece that you mentioned, which I think has been interesting but has evolved over the years, is we have a graduate degree in our department, and we have a master's degree in innovation that we copied from Stanford Biodesign. So it has brings together, like you said, you want to solve real needs that come out of the clinical environment. So bringing together clinicians, engineers, and business students from those three faculties.
Mhm.
One of the things that we've seen, and maybe you can comment on this, is that the projects that are being worked on have really evolved over time. They're really all about, most of them are digital applications at this
Mhm.
point. Do you have a similar experience with, I think you said you're creating that education program? Is it a formal
Mhm.
program like that ends up in a degree, or is it more of a course, or how are you envisioning that?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question, and we thought a lot about this. So how we will start is we'll start with courses. The courses will be master's level courses that will be cross-listed with the medical school. And through those courses, we already have a capstone project in our
Mm,
biomedical engineering department, and so that we're going to scale that as well. But the courses will be the start. So there'll be some seminars, there'll be some innovation type courses, biodesign type courses, and then eventually the vision is to scale that into a full program. I do like the idea of having it be a degree granting program. Biodesign is a little unique in that it does not grant a degree, but many of the programs that have been replicated and based off of it do. And I think that there is a value to that because, if you do a program for a year and you're a physician, for instance, then every year for the rest of your life, you have to justify what you were doing for that year, even though like these are people who are at Stanford for a year. They just didn't get a degree out of the program.
yeah.
And so Debbie Keller at Mayo Clinic, Arizona, she created this program, and that is also a degree granting program. But I think starting with a handful of courses and then scaling that into a full program is probably the way that we'll do it, so that as we have learnings along the way with our clinical sites or our learning how to integrate with the business school and learning how to have these cross-disciplinary partnerships, we can learn those lessons sort of in manageable pieces rather than all at once, because that's one of the pillars that we're focusing on, and we want to sort of stepwise scale all three.
Great. Amir, you have a question?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Amir Hushiar here. It was a great speech, and I really commend you on the achievements. I run the Surgical Performance Enhancement and Robotics Center, as Dr. Feldman kindly mentioned, and it's kind of it has somewhat overlap with what you're trying to do at Tennessee, Texas, and it was really interesting to see a great friend of mine on the list of your collaborators, Caleb Rucker, who works on surgical robotics and flexible robots.
Hmm.
Um, so my question is basically on the funding side of things. You mentioned that you have created is your institute a legal entity? It can absorb funding by itself, or you go through the University of Tennessee, Texas. That's my first question. Second question is, as you correctly mentioned, there is time constraint on our clinical colleagues, and there is more teaching constraints on or commitments on our engineering colleagues. In my experience, I found it somewhat hard to coordinate between engineers and clinical colleagues, and that has been a barrier
Hmm.
for many years. Um, um, I'm just wondering if you have found like a good sweet spot on how to manage the projects from a project management perspective. If you can enlighten me on that front, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question is an extremely important one, and that is, where does this organization live? Like, what is it? So if the hospital, say, were to own it, or to be, if it were to be under the umbrella of the hospital, then there are some major implications for legal concerns in terms of conflicts of interest, as well as a number of Stark law, for instance, in the United States, that prevent us, and there's some regulatory and compliance issues that we can run into very quickly. But outside of the hospital system, those compliance issues disappear, and so it is currently under the umbrella of the university. With the We are exploring turning this into a 501(c)(3), which would be a nonprofit organization. There is also an avenue for a for-profit organization, but there's other legal considerations for that. Again, the luxury I would say that we have is that we can design it to be what we want it to be. And so we have the opportunity to explore, okay, if we design it like this, then we can do grants, but we can't really participate with industry because of these regulatory concerns. But if we designed it this way, we could do grants and industry partnerships with which, as I'm sure you're following in the news, diversification of our funding streams has become of great interest in the US recently because of all of the issues that we're having, unfortunately. So that's what we're aiming towards. So currently under sort of our own organization under the university, with the potential for spinning off into a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization. That also allows for the other considerations with a 501(c)(3), for instance, is that if you're under the university, then you have the legal protections of the university. If you're under the hospital, you have the legal protections of the hospital. And if you're not, then you don't have those legal protections. However, if you're a wholly owned subsidiary, you still do. And so it gets really complicated really fast. But there's if your own organization, you need a really good lawyer. If you are under one of the organizations, then you sort of get the protections of the state or of the university. That's how we've been approaching that. The second question was about how do you get clinicians to stay engaged? Some of the very early feedback that we got when we presented this to our board of directors for the hospital, as well as to we have a health and human wellness colloquium through the university, is the issue that they had was with the S. Surgery. They're like, okay, this is surgery. So does that mean that we're not interested in having nurses? Or does that mean that all these people who are doing research in wearables are not invited to participate? We wanted to make sure that people felt like this was relevant to them. And so clinicians need to feel like they're doing something that it's going to be worth their time. Because if they have half a day on a Saturday that they could be spending with their family or doing other things, then they don't want to necessarily go to, like, I don't know, a pulmonary conference if you're a surgeon. So
Right.
we wanted to make sure that it's quite relevant, number one. We also there is a lot of advantage to working with engineers who are writing grants for you, and you're giving the clinical input, and then you spend an hour with them and they come up with this extraordinary grant that they've coded in Overleaf, and it's like, wow, I didn't even know that you guys did that. And so having that high value, high impact time together. So I have an hour and a half meeting every Friday with one of my engineer collaborators. He's just got a list of things that we go through, and we bang it out really fast. And so making sure that you have those high yield interactions when you do have interactions. And my light is going out. Why? Okay, it's better.
Cool.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I think we're good, Jonathan.
Yep.
Thanks a lot. Really,
Thank you so much.
really enjoyed the talks.
Really enjoyed giving the talk today and yesterday, and thank you so much for the opportunity. McGill is, an incredible institution. It's been a great honor to be able to speak to you all.
Great. Thanks.
Yep.